People of the State of Colorado versus James Egan Holmes, case number 12 CR 1522. The record should reflect that Mr. Holmes is present with his attorneys, Ms. Brady, Mr. King, Ms. Nelson, Ms. Higgs, and Ms. Spengler. And the people are represented by Mr. Brockler, Ms. Pearson, Mr. Orman, Mr. Edson, and Ms. Tish McGuire. We are outside the presence of the jury at this time. Just a housekeeping matter. I wanted to ask about the USBs that we provided throughout voir dire to make sure that you had returned all of them. Have the parties returned all of the USBs containing copies of the questionnaire?
I've been told yes, Your Honor.
And did the parties also destroy all copies of the questionnaires, including all electronic copies pursuant to my order?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, same questions for you, Mr. King.
Judge, we believe so. We're checking right now to make sure.
Okay, all right, let me know, please. Both, whether you returned all USBs and also whether all copies, including electronic copies of the questionnaires, were destroyed, please.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Is there anything we need to take up at this time on behalf of the prosecution?
There is, Your Honor. Can we approach?
Yes. Is there anything else on behalf of the people?
There is, Your Honor. The court may recall that at the end of business yesterday, I had indicated that a member from CU, and it's an attorney who's been here before, Mr. Zweckbronner, would be here to provide to the court some previously omitted emails, and I'd respectfully ask him to tender those to the court and for the court to conduct an in-camera review to determine if subsequent to the defendant's entry of a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, if we would then be entitled to the contents of those emails.
And these are emails that were not included in the group of documents that I have reviewed?
That's correct, Your Honor.
All right. Does the defense have a position on this?
Judge, just that we've maintained all of our previously asserted privileges and rights on behalf of Mr. Holmes, and so we would we'd object to the disclosure, and we'd at the very least ask the court to do an in-camera review.
Okay. I'll conduct an in-camera review, understanding the defense's position in terms of what may be disclosed. If you would approach, please, sir. And for the record, the documents are being tendered at this time. Thank you. And when you get to the podium, sir, could you please spell your last name for my court reporter?
Sure, it's Steven Zweckbronner, Z-W-E-C-K hyphen B-R-O-N-N-E-R.
Okay, thank you. All right, I will conduct an in-camera review of those records. Anything else on behalf of the people?
No, sir.
All right, anything on behalf of the defense?
No.
All right, let's bring the jury in, please. Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury is back in the courtroom. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good. All right. The people may call their next witness, please.
The people call Otto Albrecht to the stand, Your Honor.
Good morning, sir. Come around this way, please. And if I could have you raise your right hand for me so that I can administer an oath. You solemnly swear or affirm on the penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I swear.
All right, please be seated. Could you please tell us your full name and spell your first, middle, and last names?
It's Otto Albrecht. First name Otto, O-T-T-O. Last name Albrecht, A-L-B-R-E-C-H-T.
All right, Mr. Albrecht, I'll ask you to turn the microphone so that it's facing your mouth and to speak into it so that we can all hear you, please. Thank you.
Your Honor, before we go further, could I approach for a brief moment?
Yes.
That may have already been a mark that was there.
We'll send you a bill later. All right, Mr. Broccoli, you may proceed with your direct examination.
Sir, would you please tell us what you do for a living?
I'm a postdoc. Used to be a PhD student in Achim Klug's lab.
Now, does that mean you are a doctor?
Yes.
You have your PhD?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I want to take you all the way back to 2011, 2012, since you referenced Dr. Klug's lab. When you were in that lab during that period of time, did you have a special role or title?
I was a graduate student in the Department of Physiology and Biophysics.
How many years were you in Dr. Klug's lab?
So it's pretty much exactly 6 years now, counting the last year as a postdoc. And there was 5 years as a student.
How many years had you been a graduate student in Dr. Klug's lab before the 2011 summer timeframe?
2 years.
Had you had the opportunity to work with other first-year
Yeah, because I spent time with them in the lab, showing them the techniques and interacting with them more, I guess.
And would you do me a favor and scoot up just a hair bit more to the microphone?
Sure.
You can also move the microphone closer to you if you prefer. Thank you.
Or both.
Is that close enough?
That's
Yeah.
good. That's
Okay.
good. Yeah. Did you have the opportunity to try to get to know the defendant both in the lab and outside the lab?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about in the lab. How did you get to know the defendant?
Well, he was a rotation student, as I said, and me and some other people in the lab were tasked to show him like the techniques that he would be using while working in our lab. So we're basically teaching him certain procedures, experimental procedures in the lab.
Did you make efforts to try to get to know him?
Yeah, I did. And I mean, that's what I usually do, kind of like a sunny kid.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I did interact. We did talk about things in private life, I guess, and we also socialized outside the lab.
Now describe the defendant's demeanor and affect while he was in the lab. Was he chatty, talkative?
Not really. So one thing that I noticed about him and that I still remember was that he would never, or very rarely, greet if you met him in the hallway, for example. You would say hi and he would just walk past you as if he didn't notice. So yeah, he was definitely more of an introvert.
Have you seen other introverts in neuroscience?
Yes,
Not that
these
unusual?
people do exist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you make efforts to try to socialize with him outside the lab?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
As far as I remember, I went out with him and other people on 2 occasions. We went to see a hockey game, the Colorado Avalanche, and also went out to see a movie.
Do you remember what the movie was?
No.
Do you remember where you saw the movie?
I guess I would remember, but I don't. So
Did he always seem to you to be quiet?
yeah.
Did you determine, in your opinion, whether you thought he had behind that quietness, that introversion, a sense of humor?
Yes, I would say so. There were a few occasions, again, I wouldn't be able to reproduce what we talked about, but I definitely remember that we had some talks where he would open up a little bit and he would actually make me laugh, yeah, so.
Did you have the opportunity to see the defendant in his rotation presentations,
Yes.
including the first one that he did for Dr. Klug's lab? Now listen, we've all had Dr. Klug sit here and talk to us about the last 2 slides of that presentation, which he didn't think were that funny. And
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's testifying now. If he could ask a question.
it's,
Overruled.
thank
Go
you.
ahead.
He's not in the room now, so I want to ask you, there are 2 slides, one with a chicken talking to an egg, and then there was a kid with a mullet, and I think the phrase of it was, let me mull it over. Dr. Klug testified that he didn't think it was all that funny. Do you have a different opinion about that?
Well, I think it was. In fact, now that you talk about it, I remember another instance where we had, so we have lab meetings in our lab every Friday. And there was one presentation that he did where he also had like a last slide with like, I think, dinosaurs on it, which I thought was quite funny too. And it was kind of like an awkward humor, but I like it.
Right. Now, you also had the opportunity to see his very last presentation in May for his third rotation.
Yes.
Anything you remember, anything sticks out in your mind about that presentation?
There was like one awkward joke that he made. You can put this to the bank, because there was one, I think, protein that he was talking about, ATM. So yeah, that's the only thing that I remember. But other than that, no, it was kind of similar to the presentation that you did for after the rotation in our lab.
Describe his, I guess, his performance and level of effort in Dr. Klug's lab between June and roughly December of 2011.
So, well, in my opinion, and I think people in our lab would agree, he didn't show
Objection, Your Honor. I
enough
think
effort.
this is hearsay.
Sustained. You can't talk
All right.
about what other people
Sure.
said. You can only talk about what you think,
All right.
based on your observations, okay?
Okay.
All right.
So, in my opinion, he didn't show enough effort to be a successful scientist. So one thing that kind of still like that I still remember was that. So we have this. I guess I have to explain that. We have this instrument that pulls glass pipettes that we use to record from brain cells. And the way it usually works is that you switch this thing on, and then it runs for the whole experimental day, which can go on for 6 hours. And usually, I mean, once you use them up, you go ahead and pull new pipettes and just continue with the work. The way he did it was that he would pull a certain number of pipettes, say like 10, and then would just record until he ran out of pipettes, which wouldn't be no longer than, say, like 2 hours. And then he would just quit. And so that's something that showed me at least that he wasn't motivated enough to do what it takes.
Can I pretend for a moment I have no idea the significance of the pipette timing thing and ask you
Yeah.
to help us understand what is the distinction that you draw between someone who pulls 10 pipettes and finishes work in an hour and a half to 2 hours versus someone who pulls the pipettes individually and works for 6 hours? Tell me about that.
Well, as I said, so, I mean, whenever you, I guess I won't go into details of that because patch clamping is pretty complicated. But there's a lot of stuff happening. I mean, not every experiment is successful. Your pipettes break, and so you run out of them relatively quickly. So in order to be able to patch at least a couple of cells or even one cell on certain experimental days, you have to be persistent. You have to continue, and from my own experience, I just know that pulling a certain number of pipettes is just never enough. I mean, I tend to use 20 at least, and as I said, an experiment runs usually for 5 to 6 hours. And it's just the wrong way to go about it. I pull a number of pipettes. Well, sure, if I was certain that I'll patch like 5 cells with the first couple of pipettes, then I would probably do the same type of strategy, follow the same type of strategy, but it's not the way how it works. You have to continue.
Did what this do is indicate to you then a lack of effort?
Yes.
Anything else that it indicated to you?
Well, yeah, again, like one thing from, I guess, from the beginning of the rotation, but then again, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference whether there was just being shy or being lazy, I don't know, or unmotivated. But he would sit in a corner by a desk pretty far away from everyone else and then read papers. And the way it usually works, whenever you start a rotation in a lab, you're the new guy. You kind of want to show that you're motivated, that you're interested in the research that you're trying to pursue. And so people ask questions. They approach people in the lab. They ask them to show them the techniques. So you got to be proactive. That's not how he was. You would have to motivate him. You would have to ask him to come forward and ask about things, or like call him, James, look, I'm going to do this experiment now. Do you want to watch me do it? Do you want to learn the technique? And so on. So only after that approach, he would come forward and participate.
If you told him what to do, would he do what he was told?
Yes.
But left to his own initiative, you saw something lacking?
Yeah, I think so. But then again, I wasn't, so usually rotation students do get assigned to certain people in the lab, and I wasn't very closely affiliated with his training. It was other people that mostly trained him, but I definitely did some of the training, yeah. I showed him a couple of the techniques, yeah.
Couple final questions. During your time with him and your time observing him from roughly June of 2011 through that final presentation of May of 2012, do you ever remember thinking that the defendant was detached from reality?
Well, no, I don't think so.
Over that same period of time, from that June 11th to when you finally saw him, did he appear to you to be any different at the end than he was at the beginning, or was he the same guy?
Until the end of December, right? You're asking? Or,
Well, end of December, we can start there, and then I'm going to ask you about what you saw in that presentation in May.
yeah, so not that I would remember, no,
Nothing sticks out in your mind.
not really.
The guy you saw give the presentation in May, did he seem to you to be the same guy that gave the presentation at the end of the rotation in December?
Again, yeah, I don't remember the details apart from this one joke that he made, but all in all, yeah, if something would have stuck out, I would have probably noticed, but to me, he seemed to be the same.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
Cross-examination, Ms. Higgs?
Yes, thank you. If I could just have a moment.
Yes.
Thank you for being patient with me. I appreciate it. Dr. Albrecht, are you still at CU then?
Yes,
Are you still working in Dr. Klug's lab?
yes, so I extended my time to do 1 year as a postdoc, and my term runs out in mid-August.
Okay. You're then sort of still like employed by CU as opposed to attending school, right?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
I want to speak with you a little bit about the other people that were in Dr. Klug's lab with you, okay? Could we put up Defense Exhibit 8, please? And could we zoom in on Dr. Klug's lab there? And you can see it on the screen as well in front of you, you should be able to?
Nope.
No? Is it black?
It's,
It's gonna come up here soon.
Give it a moment. Let me know when you see it, okay? Or you can look at the screen.
It's up
on the-
now.
Yep.
Okay. So, does this box kind of represent that first lab rotation, the dates that you talked about?
well, I guess, yeah, it shows the official lap rotation time, but as I said, he did this voluntary summer rotation prior to that he extended into the fall, yeah.
So normally the lab would go from August to November, but he started in June.
Yes.
Okay. And that's not something that all students do, is that right?
Yep.
Okay. It also indicates, there's a RA, like research assistant is what that stands for. I don't know if that's accurate, but is Anna Donzio also somebody who was working in the lab with you?
Yes.
Was she another, what was her role? Was it the same as yours or was it different?
No, she was a postdoc, so she had her PhD already. So she was a postdoctoral research assistant.
So she was doing then what you are doing now?
Right.
Okay. Now, my understanding is that you kind of she had been in the lab for quite some time as well, is that correct?
Yes. Although a little bit shorter than Florian and I were. I guess Florian is missing here. But he was also a graduate student during that time in Achim's lab.
Okay, and that's Florian Mayer?
Yes.
Or Meyer? I'm not
Meyer,
sure. Meyer,
yeah.
okay. My understanding is that you and the other, like Anna Donzio, would sort of alternate working primarily with the rotational students that would come through the lab.
That's correct.
Okay. And when Mr. Holmes came through your lab, it was sort of Anna's turn to be up. Is that right?
I think so.
Okay. You said earlier that, let me try to get your words right. You weren't closely affiliated with Mr. Holmes' training in the lab, correct?
Well, no. Less closely, in fact, than with other first-year students. So, as I said, yeah, it was mostly Anna who was training him. I just showed a couple of the techniques.
Okay. Would that have been in June when you first came into the lab? Is that when you would teach the techniques?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we can take that down. Thank you. After you then taught him those techniques in June, Anna was more involved in continuing with his training and monitoring his work. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Although, by the time the rotation ends, students are usually on their own, mostly. I mean, they're supposed to do their experiments themselves.
Right. I understand that you do some training initially with the techniques, but then you expect them to move on their own, correct?
Yeah.
You don't sit down with them periodically all throughout to the end of the rotation and say, hey, you're not doing this right. You expect them to get it themselves, right?
Yes.
Okay. So when you would see that Mr. Holmes would stop his experiments early, in your opinion, it really wasn't your obligation to sit down and say, that's not acceptable, you need to draw more pipettes. And that's not your role in the lab, correct?
Yeah, as I said, I mean, usually, if you're in science, you have to motivate yourself. So, but I don't know. I mean, usually if we see that someone doesn't bring the effort, we do talk to people usually. Like, you have to change, you have to change your behavior. You have to be more persistent. So I guess, again, my memory is very fuzzy at this point, but I'm pretty sure that at least one of us had that kind of conversation with him.
You don't recall yourself having that conversation specifically with Mr. Holmes?
Yeah, not really.
So you can't tell this jury for sure that that's something that you did with Mr. Holmes, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. You said when he first came into the lab, you had an inkling that maybe he was fairly shy. Is that right?
An introvert, yeah.
Introverted,
Yeah.
quiet,
Yes.
didn't instigate conversation,
Yeah.
didn't come ask questions.
Yeah.
In order to have a conversation with him, you would have to initiate that. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Thank you. She's writing it down today.
Yes,
So,
yes.
And that didn't change at all throughout the rotation, correct?
Yeah. I think so, yeah.
So even in the times where you sat down and were able to have more in-depth conversations with him, the times that he made you laugh on occasion, those were still conversations you had to start, you had to initiate.
Yeah, most of the times, yeah.
Okay. During all that time working or seeing him in the lab, I also understand that aside from the actual bench work that you had, like lab meetings at the end of the week or every 2 weeks, is that right?
Pardon?
Didn't the lab have meetings where you would discuss papers?
Oh, yeah. So back in the day, we used to have it every Friday, yeah.
Every Friday?
Every Friday, yeah.
Okay. And Mr. Holmes was the same in those meetings as well? Quiet, didn't instigate conversation, is that right?
Yeah.
But when he was asked to present a paper, he was able to do that, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Thank you.
correct.
That's a yes. And you said you saw him sort of sitting in the corner reading papers, is that right?
That's correct.
So other scientific papers?
Yeah, so what happens usually is that whenever you start in the lab, you start reading the literature because you don't know necessarily everything that you're supposed to know about the research. So people usually start by reading background literature about the research that's been done in the lab. And I mean, it's fine that he did that. It's just people are usually proactive and don't wait to start, can't wait to start with experiments. I mean, that's how it usually goes.
So that shows some initiative and motivation that he was actually interested in the research being done in the lab, that he would read those background papers. Is that fair?
Well, as I said, not necessarily. I would actually say it would be contrary. Because usually people who are interested in the research, they want to do the experiments. And they're interested in seeing how it's been done. And they come forward, they ask questions, they watch you do the preparations, do the experiments. That's not how he was. He would usually sit quietly in his corner and just read. The reading part is fine. That's what all people do.
And that's important for the students to do.
Of course.
Okay.
But it's just one part of the work that they're supposed to do.
So he was able to do the reading part, look at the papers, present the papers when he was required to, but it's sort of the teamwork of getting involved in the experiments that was difficult for him. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's not really teamwork. I mean, it's about learning the technique. Yeah, right. So you observe how someone does the experiment, and then you try to copy that.
But it involves working with other people to learn the experiments.
Yes.
So in that sense, there is some work as a team in the lab, that you have to kind of be part of the team to learn those things.
I guess.
Okay.
Although it's more like more of a mentor-apprentice relationship.
Okay. But requires working with other people.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to go through my notes to make sure I'm hitting all my points. Now, in all the time that you saw Mr. Holmes in the lab with you, Well, actually, let me touch on another topic and then we'll come back to this, okay? You said that you went out with him 2 times on social occasions, is that right?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. It's easier, I think, to write down yes than yeah.
Okay.
On both of those occasions, was it you that invited Mr. Holmes to come? Or was it he that suggested the outing?
Yeah, so I think that in the case of the hockey game, I was the organizer
Okay.
because I was the biggest hockey fan in the almost the whole department.
Okay.
No, I mean, but yeah, I was definitely a big fan, the biggest fan of hockey in our lab. So I was definitely organizing a lot of these things. But in the case of the movie, these decisions were usually made as a group, or someone else could also, could have come forward with that idea.
Is this sort of people in the lab getting together and deciding to do something socially?
That's correct,
Okay.
yeah.
And so Mr. Holmes, being a rotation student in the lab, would be invited to go to those things?
Yes.
Okay. And he went to two things. I think the movie was in the summer, is that right? And then the hockey game in the fall.
The hockey game was in the fall, because that's when the hockey season starts. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure about the movie. I don't remember when that was.
It would have been sometime during the rotation?
Yes.
Okay. So you didn't have any social interaction with Mr. Holmes after he left the lab, is that right?
No.
Now, you've also mentioned seeing this lab rotation at the end of the year, so the third rotation lab presentation, okay?
Yep.
Did you see the second rotation lab presentation?
I don't remember it. I
Okay.
think I didn't.
Okay. And my understanding, in addition to what you said, is that third lab rotation that you saw was the best of the ones that you saw.
Did I say that? Well, yeah. So, assuming that it was the first and the third that I saw, it was definitely better than the first.
I think it was more serious. Is that right?
It's a typical progression for a first year student to
Get better.
show that kind of progress.
Right.
So usually people do get better over the course of their rotations. Yeah.
And I also understand that over the course of the rotations, more people will work. It's part of the responsibility of the PI, and the other students in the lab will also work with the first year student to help them with their presentations. Is that right?
Across the different lab rotations?
No, within each one. So you get a new group of people in each lab rotation that's helping you with that final presentation.
I didn't get the question.
I know.
Yeah.
I don't think I asked that very well.
Yeah.
In your lab with Dr. Klug, when Mr. Holmes was preparing for his presentation, it's fair to say that people in the lab would give input and help him prepare that. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. Same would happen in the second lab. So by the third lab, he's had a number of experiences trying to put this together. Is that right?
I don't know whether you can put it this way, because the lab rotations are distinct works of research. So you cannot really put them together into one. So each lab rotation presentation is about the research that's been done in the lab, and only about that research.
But each lab will help him prepare his presentation.
You're talking about all 3 labs helping him with the third presentation?
No, individually in each lab.
Individual, yes.
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 And I think that you described that last presentation as being more serious. Is that fair?
I would say so.
More professionally given. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. More scientifically sound.
Yes.
Okay. I want to just back up a little bit to the time that he spent with you in the lab. During that entire period of time, did Mr. Holmes never exhibited any rude behavior?
No,
Never was mean or angry to anybody in the lab, is that right?
no,
He never kind of put himself out there as an attention seeker.
no, definitely not.
And you kind of raised your eyebrows at that. Does that mean that really he was quite the opposite of that? Is that fair?
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor. I don't have any other questions for you.
Mr. Bruckler, do you have any redirect?
There's one question, Your Honor.
I just want to make sure that I understand the last part of the examination by Ms. Higgs. You feel like the defendant's performance in the middle of May on that last rotation talk was actually an improvement?
I would say so, yeah.
Nothing further.
Any recross, Ms. Higgs?
No, Your Honor.
The jury does not, the jury may have some questions for you. So if you would give us a moment, please. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Would counsel please approach? Sir, the jury has submitted some questions that, based on the rules of evidence and other applicable rules of law, I have determined are appropriate. The first question is, did he read the literature on his laptop or printed material?
Oh my God. Yeah, I wish I could remember that. It might have been both.
The next question is, did you ever notice the defendant acting out of the ordinary when you went out with friends?
As I said, I don't remember much, including the people who went along on these to these events. But if something would have stuck out, I probably would remember. So I guess no.
The next question is, how did he interact with you and your mutual friends outside of class?
I don't remember that.
The next question is, have other students had similar shyness or lack of effort in your experience?
Let's see. I guess there were cases where you would see a similar lack of effort. Yeah. But most of them didn't.
And the final question is, if the defendant only spent 1 to 2 hours on an experiment, what did he do with the rest of the time, if you know? In other words, you can't speculate, but if you know.
Yeah, so the way I remember it, he would finish an experiment, he would just walk away from the lab, so he would just leave. And it's either, I mean, in some cases, you know, first year students have classes in the afternoon, so that might have been one reason, but then I guess the other way would be, to explain it, would be that he went home. But yeah, I can't.
Your Honor, I
give more
object
explicit
motion to
answers
strike.
on
That
this.
was that was speculation.
All right, I'll grant the request to strike the last part. So the last part, because the witness doesn't have any personal knowledge as to what the defendant may or may not have done when he left the lab, is stricken and the jury should disregard it. That means that you should treat it as though you never heard it, okay? All right, thank you. Mr. Brockler, do you have any follow-up questions based on those questions?
One, Your Honor. Thank you. Sir, you've described the defendant using terms shy, quiet, and introverted in the lab. You've been asked a question by the jury about how he was outside of that lab. Had the defendant presented to you remarkably different from that, do you think you would recall that?
I would say so, yeah.
And you don't recall anything like that?
No.
Nothing further.
Any follow-up questions from you, Ms. Higgs?
Just very briefly, you didn't hang out with your friends with Mr. Holmes outside of class other than the 2 occasions that you've already talked about.
These are the 2 occasions that I remember, yes.
So it wasn't as if after the lab day is done, you're hanging out with Mr. Holmes with your friends on a regular basis?
No.
Okay. And after the lab ended in November or December of 2012, you had no contact directly with Mr. Holmes other than seeing another one of his presentations?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
May this witness be released from his subpoena?
Yes, sir.
Is there any objection?
No.
All right, sir, thank you. Call your next witness, please.
We will call Jason Tregellas to the stand. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, sir. Could I have you raise your right hand so that I can administer an oath? Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Please be seated. Could you please tell us your full name and spell your first, middle, and last names?
Jason Richard Tregellas, Jason Richard Tregellas.
All right, sir, I'm going to ask you to speak right into the microphone so that everyone can hear you, please. All right, Mr. Brockler, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, would you tell us what you do for a living?
I do research and teach at the University of Colorado Medical School.
In what part of the medical school?
I'm in the Department of Psychiatry, and I'm also in the neuroscience program, and I'm also with the VA hospital.
Do you teach a specific course or set of courses within the neuroscience program?
Yes, I do.
How long have you been doing that?
For 5 or 6 years.
Were you doing it back in 2012, the spring semester of 2012?
Yes, I was.
Was there a specific course that you were teaching back then?
Yes, there was.
What was it?
It was the neurobiological basis of psychiatric and neurological disorders.
Now, beyond teaching it, were you also the course director for that course?
Yes, I was.
By the way, could we have, with the court's permission, Defense Exhibit 8, please?
Yes.
Ma'am? Now, do you see this, is it on your screen, sir? Doctor?
Yes, it is.
And doctor's the right term?
Sure.
Professor?
Whatever.
You don't care either?
I don't care.
All right. Can you look on your screen and tell us where this course would fit on this sort of calendar of events here?
It's the bottom course.
Could you, ma'am, highlight that one for me? Thank you so much. Boom. Is that it?
Yes, it is.
And are those the accurate dates as best you can recall?
As best as I can recall, yes.
Now, this particular class, and ma'am, thank you, you can take that down. This particular class, is it mandatory for students to take, or is it an elective?
It is an elective.
And how many students are in this class, specifically back in spring of 2012?
It typically varies between 6 and 12. A number of graduate students from the neuroscience program and from other programs regularly attended, as well as postdocs and others who are interested in the particular topics. It was essentially taught as a seminar series, so local experts were invited to talk on their field of expertise.
Now, as the course director back in spring of 2012, did you have sort of overall responsibility for putting this seminar together and making sure people showed up and talked about different things?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Sir, I'm going to hand you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 1092. Do you recognize what that is?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
It's the syllabus from the course that we're discussing.
Now, is that a fair and accurate representation of the courses and the times that they were taught during the spring semester of 2012?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I'm going to move for the admission of People's Exhibit 1092 into evidence.
Is there any objection, Ms. Brady?
You object under 401 and 403?
Can I see that, sir? Would counsel please approach? All right, the 401, 402, and 403 objection is overruled. The exhibit P-DR-1092 is admitted.
May I inquire, Your Honor?
You may.
Thank you. Doctor, this particular syllabus, now not every single course is taught by you throughout this course. Each class isn't taught by you personally. Is that fair?
That is correct.
Do you attend even classes that you don't end up teaching yourself?
Yes, I do.
Do you have the opportunity to make observations about the students that attend this class?
I do.
Are you from time to time notified if there are any attendance issues if you become aware of them?
Yes, I am.
Now, you also teach specific blocks within this course, is that fair?
That is correct.
Which ones do you teach?
I teach an introductory lecture. I also teach a section on schizophrenia.
Now, in terms of, to be fair, the section on schizophrenia is not as much about symptoms as it is about, what's the title of the course again?
So the particular part that I taught was overview and imaging, and it is that is correct. It does not focus on clinical symptoms. The focus is on neurobiology.
There's an initial part of the presentation that touches on symptoms, but the rest of it's on the rest of biology.
Yes, for it only touches on the clinical symptoms for 5 minutes.
Now, in the spring of 2012, one of the students that you had in this class, was it the defendant over here in the blue and white striped shirt with the beard, mustache, and glasses?
Yes, it was.
All right. Did you ever note any attendance issues with the defendant throughout this course?
I did not.
You had the opportunity to observe all these students through this course. Does anything stick out in your mind about this particular student that you had back then?
No, it does not.
If there had been something that was particularly noteworthy or aberrant or different, do you think you would recall that?
I do.
And you recall nothing?
I do not.
You guys have that one. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Sir, I'm handing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 1214. Would you please take a look at that? Do you recognize what that is?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
It is a brief email exchange in which James Holmes and I briefly discussed when he would give his presentation and the topic of his presentation. One of the requirements for this course was that students had to give brief presentations about topics, and this email exchange just sets the date and the topic that he selected.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of the electronic communication that you had with the defendant from this course?
Yes, it is.
Doesn't look like it's been changed or altered in any way?
It does not.
Is it normal, by the way, for you to communicate with students like this back and forth?
Yes.
Anything unusual about the content of this particular email?
Nope.
Consistent with the other communications you'd have with other students over that same period of time?
Yes, it is. These kinds of things were either arranged electronically or by speaking in the classroom.
Your Honor, I'm going to move for the admission of Peoples 1214 into evidence.
Any objection, Ms. Brady?
Object to hearsay and relevance.
Can I see that, sir? All right, counsel, please approach. All right, the objections are overruled, both as to hearsay and relevance, so People's Exhibit P-TR-1214 is admitted. Here you go, sir. Thank you.
May I inquire, Your Honor?
You may, thank you.
Sir, that particular email, the subject matter of it refers to a presentation that is done at the end of the class. Is that fair?
Yes.
Now, each student is required, as you said, to pick a subject. What subject did the defendant pick to talk about at the end of the rotation?
microRNA biomarkers.
And did he present on that?
Yes, he did.
you remember the date that he presented that to the class?
Only by looking at the schedule, May 8th.
And so let me just clean up the record here. You don't have an independent recollection of it? And that's okay, I'm just asking.
My recollection is only, it's informed by the date on the schedule here, which I remember was correct.
So that exhibit 1214 refreshed your recollection as to when the presentation was?
Correct.
All right, these are just simply magic words that have to, this guy has to type now, sorry. On May the 8th, the defendant then gave this presentation on microRNA, what'd you say, biomarkers?
Biomarkers.
Biomarkers. Do you remember anything about the presentation?
It was, I do not. It was a typical, it was fairly unremarkable.
Had it been remarkable, either for how awesome it was or how not awesome it was, do you think it would stick out in your mind?
If it had been on either of those extremes, yes, I would.
Okay. Is that the normal scale you use, awesome to not awesome?
It's similar to that. But.
Okay, yeah. Sciencey. Let me ask you a couple of final questions. Over this period of time, do you ever recall thinking to yourself that the defendant was detached from reality?
I do not.
From the time that you first began seeing him at the beginning of the class, at the front end of 2012, through, and was the presentation the last time you would have had the opportunity to observe the defendant?
Yes.
I'm going to put my arms back up. From the front end of January until this May 8th presentation, did you ever detect or recall detecting any change in the defendant's demeanor, presentation, appearance?
I do not.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Brady, cross-examination.
Thank you. Morning.
Good morning.
The title of the seminar is Biological Basis of Psychiatric and Neurological Disorders, correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Holmes was in that class?
That is correct.
And I think you testified that would have been in the spring of 2012.
That is correct.
Do you recall Mr. Holmes being kind of awkward in the class?
I do not.
Do you recall he did not engage with other students?
I don't have any specific recollection of that.
Do you recall interviewing with an FBI agent July 20th of 2012?
I do.
That FBI agent would have been John Henderson?
Okay, I don't recall his name.
Okay. And you don't recall saying that Mr. Holmes did not engage much with other students in the class?
I do not recall saying that.
Do you recall telling that FBI agent that Mr. Holmes did not say much during class?
I do not specifically recall that.
Do you recall telling the FBI agent that Mr. Holmes frequently used his iPhone during class?
I do not specifically recall that.
Did you have any contact with Mr. Holmes outside of class?
I did not.
Do you recall telling the FBI agent that Mr. Holmes had a flat affect?
I do not recall that, no.
Do you not recall, or you did not tell the FBI agent?
I do not recall whether I did or not.
Okay. Do you recall telling the FBI agent that Mr. Holmes seemed to march to his own drummer?
I may have a very hazy recollection of mentioning that,
Okay.
but it's difficult to recall.
Do you recall whether Mr. Holmes did march to his own drummer?
I do not recall.
Do you recall telling the FBI agent that Mr. Holmes displayed unusual mannerisms?
I do recall when I was interviewed that I thought one of the students who could have been Mr. Holmes had some slightly different mannerisms during the presentation, but in retrospect, I was unsure that I was thinking of the correct student in that instance.
And the time when you spoke to the FBI agent was on July 20th of 2012, correct?
I don't recall that date specifically, but I assume that to be correct.
Okay, and if that was correct, that would have just been a month or two after the presentation, correct?
Yes,
So it would have been easier to remember in July of 2012 which student had the unusual mannerisms than it would be to remember that now. Is that fair to say?
that is true, although I recall my recollection of that, of which student that was actually in question shortly after I was interviewed. I do remember that.
Okay. Now, Mr. Holmes's presentation in your class had nothing to do with mental illness, did it? Had to do with these microRNAs?
Well, these microRNAs, I believe one of the themes of his talk, although I don't remember clearly, was the potential involvement of these in mental illness.
Okay, but was it a biological or a sort of a genetic basis?
Yes.
And in your seminar, there was some discussion of mental illness, correct?
And when I spoke, yes.
And when others spoke in your seminar?
Yes.
So the way your seminar works is that you may teach one or two classes, but then other people come in and teach other classes.
That is correct.
And so there may be, I think the syllabus said one time it was on autism.
That is correct.
One was on Parkinson's disease, I think.
Yes.
You spoke on schizophrenia.
Yes.
And I think you said that maybe the first 5 minutes would have been a description of schizophrenia, but the rest of your talk was on the biological or genetic components of schizophrenia.
That is correct.
You did not discuss delusions in your seminar?
Not other than in brief passing.
Now, prior today, you've spoken with Mr. Brockler, have you not?
Yes, I have.
And you have not spoken with me or members of the defense team, have you?
That is correct.
And we requested to have an interview with you?
I did receive multiple phone calls, from both sides, and that I did not return.
Okay, but you did end up speaking with Mr. Brockler on February 3rd of this year?
In the end, I did, yes.
And you have never spoken to the defense team?
That is correct.
Is that because you're concerned about potential lawsuits for the university?
No, I just do not have any interest in speaking to either parties.
Although you spoke to Mr. Brockler?
I did, in the end, yes.
And are you here today with a lawyer from the university?
Yes, I am.
Who is that?
Steve Zwickbronner.
And is he here in the courtroom?
Are you here, Steve? Oh, yes, he is.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right, thank you. Do you have any redirect?
I do, Your Honor, thank you.
Couple things. One, did we meet in person or speak by phone?
Yeah, we just spoke by phone.
Thank you. In terms of the questions that Ms. Brady asked you about this student who had a presentation that you were remembering some things about, I want to be clear about what you were saying after that line of questioning. Shortly after you made those statements, did you conclude that that was actually a different student and not the defendant who you were describing to the detective?
I believe I did. I was unsure.
Finally, there was a question about whether or not you had active discussions about delusions. Do you remember, as part of your introductory presentation on the topic of schizophrenia, did you play videos of people describing their delusions?
There were 2 brief video segments that were played, and one of those videos did include some discussion of a patient's delusion.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Any recross?
And do you remember telling the FBI agent that you did not discuss what delusions are in your seminar?
I don't have a specific recollection of that.
Okay, so do you have a recollection right now whether during your seminar you discussed what delusions were?
I believe that during the lecture it was only pointed out that delusions are a symptom of the illness, but no detail was offered.
So it was as basic as just saying delusions can be a symptom of schizophrenia?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, there do not appear to be any questions from the jury. So may this witness be released from his subpoena?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objection? All right, thank you, sir. All right, members of the jury, it's time for our morning break. Please keep my advisements in mind during the break. Make sure you comply with all of them, and I'll see you back here in about 20 minutes. Thank you. Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury has exited the courtroom. Is there anything we need to talk about at this time from the people?
No, Your Honor.
Anything on behalf of the defense?
No.
All right. Thank you. Enjoy the break. I'll see you in 20 minutes.